Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Hammered Corner. In today's video, we have an introduction into the coinage of Henry VII. On screen now, you can see displayed timestamps, so you can easily refer to certain parts of the video easily in the future. Just before we get into it, be sure to leave a like on the video and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video here on the channel. Henry Tudor is by far the most underappreciated Tudor, especially when we open up the conversation about the incredible family line. Henry Tudor ascended to the throne in dramatic circumstances, taking it by force and through the death of the incumbent monarch, Richard III, on the battlefield. As a boy of 14, he fled England to the relative safety of Burgundy, fearing that his position as the strongest Lancastrian claimant to the English throne made it too dangerous for him to remain. During this exile, the turbulence of the War of the Roses continued, but support still existed for a Lancastrian to take the throne from the Yorkists Edward IV and Richard III. Hoping to garner this support, in the summer of 1485 Henry left Burgundy with his troop of ships bound for the British Isles. He headed for Wales, his homeland and a stronghold of support for him and his forces. He and his army landed at the Mill Bay on the Pembrokeshire coast on 7th of August and proceeded to march inland, amassing great support as they travelled further towards London. On the 22nd of August 1485, the two sides met at Bosworth, a small market town in Leicestershire, and a decisive victory was made by Henry. He was crowned on the battlefield as the new monarch, Henry VII. Henry was the first monarch of House Tudor and would reign for 24 years, and in that time much change in the political landscape of England. While there was never a period of security for Henry, there could be said to be some measure of stability compared to the period immediately before. He saw off pretenders and threats from foreign powers through careful political manoeuvring and decisive military action, winning the last Battle of the Roses, the Battle of Stoke, in 1487. Henry was the last monarch to win the crown by battle, and the crown was then passed on through legitimate heirs. He cemented his crown by marrying Elizabeth of York. For the first 4 years of his reign, his coins only differ in name and mint mark from those of his predecessors. Henry's reign saw an incredible advancement in the coin's design that would lay the foundations of how the English coinage would continue to look 500 years later. The Renaissance period was sweeping Europe, and Henry issued coin dies to have a realistic representation of him, moving away from the medieval front-facing portrait that we were accustomed to seeing since the recoinage of Edward I in 1279. And we will look at a comparison a bit later on. Now, Henry brought great economic stability back to England, stabilising royal income, and even gained the nickname Henry the Exchequer. For a number of centuries, the crown relied on the exchequer to be basis of finance. The exchequer had two functions: to receive and pay out money, and to audit accounts. The exchequer employed many people, some of whom had the primary function of trying to stop embezzlement and fraud. Though there must have been some corrupt officials, the punishment for crimes committed in the treasury were so severe that this alone put off many. However, the primary weakness of the exchequer was the simple fact that it was very slow in what it did. Audits could take years to complete, and this meant that the crown was always going to be short of money. It was this weakness that Henry VII resolved to change. Henry decided to build on the chamber that had been introduced by the Yorkist family. This was a more informal setup than the exchequer, and it was a fairly new institution that had no operating processes set in stone. The chamber's flexibility in approach was its main strength. The system was a great favourite of Edward IV's, who had seen it work in day-to-day running of the great estates of the senior nobility. Edward used the king's chamber to run his finances, and men who worked this were personally appointed by the king. When Henry VII succeeded in 1485, his main concern was survival. Therefore he reverted to using the slow-moving exchequer. But Henry's worsening financial well-being made him change course. In the reign of Richard III, royal estates had brought in £25,000 a year. By 1486, this had declined to £12,000. Clearly Henry had to do something. Henry knew that to survive as a king, he needed the money to finance an effective royal army. Therefore, he had to modernise the way the royal income was collected. Henry decided to restore the chamber to its former position as the most important institution of financial administration. At the end of the century, revenue from royal estates was in excess of £100,000 a year. So there's lots to cover in today's video, So firstly, we will look at the gold coins minted during his reign. Firstly, we have a sovereign worth 20 shillings, a very large coin with king enthroned, holding scepter, weighing 15.5 grams of gold. This was the first time that this coin was introduced as the new gold pound. We then have the incredibly rare double and treble sovereign. These are both introduced probably as a presentation piece, both with the same dies as one of the sovereign variations. We then have the real, worth 10 shillings, with the king in ship holding sword and shield, and the reverse displaying a coat of arms within the newly introduced Tudor rose. We then have the angel and half angel, worth 6 shillings and 8 pence, and 3 shillings and 4 pence. These are by far the most affordable and most common gold coins minted under Henry, and one day I will be wealthy enough to own a collection of hammered gold. For those who have never owned or handled hammered gold, there is an incredible amount of weight and impressiveness that is not replicated with its silver counterparts. So now we will look at the silver coins minted during his reign. We will split these into two parts, the medieval style and the portrait style coins. Firstly, we have the incredibly small farthing, quite a rare coin listed in Spinks 2021 for £525 in fine condition. We then have the more common halfpenny bearing the same medieval portrait of the king. We have two pennies, the standard and the sovereign type. The standard has a traditional portrait of the king, and the sovereign type displays the king enthroned, a bit like my coin we saw earlier. We then have the half groat, worth 2 pence. And finally the largest denomination for this style of coin, the groat, worth 4 pence. Realistic portraiture was first introduced in 1484 in Italy, where they were portraying their rulers in true Renaissance style. Realistic portraiture was first introduced outside of Europe in Scotland, before the English adapted the same designs. So in the first few years of the 16th century, Henry introduced the portrait coinage, introducing the testoon, the coin that would later be reintroduced by Edward VI as the shilling. The testoon was now the largest silver denomination of coin minted, tripling the worth of the already circulating groat. We then have the groat, worth 4 pence, and the half groat. On screen now you can see both groats that were minted during this reign, allowing you to see the comparatives that make up the two designs. It was probably extremely refreshing to see some new designs that differed away from the medieval front-facing bust that has been circulating for 230 years previous, especially for us numismatists now in the 21st century. Thanks, Henry. We also see the removal of the inner legend. Now coins either used "I have made God my helper" or stated the mint. We can also see the introduction of the large shield bearing the coat of arms and the long cross, the reverse design that we see on coins through the entire Tudor monarchy. James I removed the long cross and implemented the new coat of arms in 1603 after the death of Elizabeth I. And now we will go on to the Irish coins minted under Henry. Ireland represented a major challenge to Henry VII's beliefs in strong monarchical rule. During the War of the Roses, Ireland had been primarily for the Yorkists, and as a Lancastrian, Henry would have had little support. Henry VII ultimately adopted a different approach to governing what was potentially the most difficult of his regions. Ireland was effectively governed by its chieftains, and the government only really controlled a small section of the island, the so-called English Pale. So while Henry VII was Lord of Ireland, he could not use a council appointed by him to govern the Irish. The early issue of coinage produced for circulation in Ireland saw a 3-crown design on the obverse, produced in Ireland by Richard III, Henry VII, and Edward IV. They bear the sovereign's name, reading King of England and France, and the Dublin or Waterford mint on the reverse. The new coins had the royal arms on the obverse, and the reverse displayed the arms of Ireland. 3 crowns in pale, set over a cross with triple pellet ends, hence the coinage is known as the 3-crown issue. He issued a 3-crown groat, a more traditional style with a coat of arms, and crowns within a beaded circle, and one style was the coat of arms in quatrefoil, and the obverse with a crown surrounded by the treasure. He also issued a half groat, a penny, and a halfpenny. This early issue was designed and minted from 1485 to 97, and from 1497 to 1505 the mint produced a front-facing portrait of the king. The first 2 groups that were produced were 4 grains heavier than the groups that followed. And this is a good starting point to learning these issues, and a good place to start is the Irish and Scottish Spinks book, where you can find some good information about Henry's rule and how it impacted the Irish economy, as well as some great examples and lots of issues produced. When we look at the coin's legend, it will tell us a lot about the monarch, and often their religious beliefs displayed as propaganda. As Henry produced two different style coinages, we will look and decipher each, and what to look for when you go about translating your own. So firstly, we will look at the front-facing coins. If we take a look at the obverse side of the coin, the legend begins to the right of the initial mark, to the right of the king's crown, and it translates to Henry, by the grace of God, King of England and France. So even though Henry was Lord of Ireland, it wasn't until Henry VIII gained and passed on the title of King of Ireland in 1541 that we began to see HIB, or Ireland, in the coin's legend. The reverse is possibly my favourite style of any coin ever produced, and we have two parts. The outer legend displays I have made God my helper, and the inner legend lets us know where the coin was minted, reading Civitas, translating to city of, and the city of which the coin was struck. And with the introduction of the profile issue coin, the obverse legend remains almost the same, with one variant issuing coins with Henry's full title, Henry VII. The reverse was completely redesigned, and we now have the coat of arms in the centre, with the lilies of France and the lions of England in the four quarters. We have now reverted back to a single legend, around the edge of the coin, that starts at 1 o'clock, translating to I have made God my helper. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a video here on the channel. Be sure to check out the other videos using the link to the playlist on screen and in the video description. Thank you all for watching, and as always, keep collecting!